There in Hijaz, he studied under some of the greatest intellectuals of the 18th century. And it is one of the striking features of the 18th century that the ulama of Haramain, or the scholars of the two holy shrines or two holy sanctuaries, had gathered from all over the Muslim world. It was like the cream of the Muslim academia, and it gave Shah Waliullah and others a window open to just society at large through the Hajis or the pilgrims. And we see that it was the 18th century school of Haramain, the Hadith scholars and the Tariqas, which gave the rise to perhaps the 3 or 4 most important revolutionary movements through specific scholars of Shah Waliullah's time. Abu Tahir al-Madani, of course, is the teacher of Shah Waliullah, Wafdullah Makki, Tajuddin al-Qala'i, and Muhammad Hayat al-Sindhi. The 4 scholars that I mentioned, or 3 specifically, are Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, the founder of the Muwahhideen group, which was later condemned or known as al-Wahhabiyya. The second, of course, is Shah Waliullah Muhaddith ad-Dihlawi, and the third being Uthman ibn Fudi, or Uthman Dan Fadio. All 3 had roots laying within the ulama of Haramain. Shah Waliullah returns after a year in 1732. He begins writing. We shall deal with his writings. He started writing the famous Hujjatullah, which is considered his magnum opus, and in 1762 he dies. He dies in 1762, leaving the eldest son from his second wife, Shah Abdul Aziz, as his successor and heir. To appreciate the political context of that time, as I mentioned, Shah Waliullah was born in 1703, which was just 3 years before the demise of the Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb Alamgir. Aurangzeb Alamgir is renowned to be an Islamist by many and condemned by many as a brutal warlord who perhaps exploited the Sharia and the scholarly milieu at the time. He came into power by imprisoning his father. Firstly, imprisoned his father Shah Jahan, who was the builder of Taj Mahal, as we all know, and by murdering or massacring his brother Dara Shikoh, his elder brother. Aurangzeb believed that he had to imprison his father because his father had taken the exchange or the bank into bankruptcy through building the Taj Mahal, and any of you have been there, he was trying to make a second Taj Mahal in black for himself, but that didn't happen. Secondly, in terms of Dara Shikoh, there has now been a recent study showing that Aurangzeb was perhaps justified in murdering his brother on grounds that he had become an apostate. Further studies will continue on that. Yes, so Aurangzeb, rahmatullah alayh, he is perhaps known as covering the largest territory of India ever known in history. Apart from Emperor Ashoka, his empire reigned from Afghanistan all the way to Hyderabad. He died in a 25-year brutal warfare in the Deccan Plateau with rebels. The rebels consisted of the Marathas, the Sikhs, and the Rajputs. He was succeeded by Bahadur Shah, who is recalled in history for being inept. His incompetence perhaps originates from the strict tutelage of his father, which seems to have scarred him for life. Apart from that, he had a large family. He had 18 sons and 183 daughters. He had ties with the Sikhs, which were to be the prime enemies in the Delhi area. He made diplomatic ties with Guru Gobind Singh, who had fought 20 battles with the Mughals. in an attempt to ease off resistance. Nonetheless, perhaps the greatest challenge he encountered was the inner politics within the family, which led to the decline of the Mughal power and the rise of certain individuals within the Mughal government. The most striking of these are the Barha Sayyids, or known as the Sayyid brothers, who exploited their Sayyid or their prophetic genealogy to at their advantage. What they managed to do is they managed to use Jahandar, who was the successor of Bahadur Shah, and they used Farrukh Shah, who was his nephew, to overthrow the leader of the empire, the emperor Jahandar. Farrukh Shah, after Jahandar was overthrown or ousted, Farrukh Shah was then imprisoned by the Sayyid brothers. He was blinded with needles, and then he was strangled to death in 1719. After Farrukh Shah, his brother Rafi'ud-Darajat was appointed leader at the behest of the Sayyid brothers, and he too was killed in a matter of a few months. After him, Nikusir was appointed leader by a minister known as Birbal. He was raised in the harems all his life. He spoke like a Katamite, and he exercised no power, and he too was killed at the behest of the Sayyid brothers. This is just to show the political situation at the time, and perhaps to summarize the political situation in a nutshell, within 100 years of Aurangzeb's death, the Mughal Empire was to become a puppet of a Maratha Empire and the British East India Company, with little power beyond Delhi and ignored by most of the Indian princes. Let us move on to the areas of reform which Shah Waliullah Muhaddith ad-Dihlawi thought were most important to revive the Indian community. What we see in the Hujjatullah al-Baligha or in other works is that he foresaw that Muslim tradition and history is going to go through a monumental change. He felt that Muslims will no longer rule, no longer be the ruling classes. Instead, they will be ruled by non-Muslims. So he intended to prepare posterity for this reality. And looking at the areas of his reform, I would like to point out the most pertinent ones to our society today, again, to build the case for Shah Waliullah in modern-day Britain. Perhaps the first and most important part of his reform is that on theology, on Aqidah. Many scholars believe that Aqidah, or basing a reform on theology, is perhaps the way and method of the prophets. And this is what differentiates the reform of the prophets and the saints from that of, say, secularists or socialists and bankers, capitalists. Yeah. Secondly, on a theological level, on a scholarly level, what he managed to do was to reconcile between the old-aged contention between what apparently seems as two contradictory doctrines of Wahdatul Wujud and Wahdatul Shuhud. Anyone interested in that can refer to At-Tafhimat al-Ilahiyya and Hujjatullah al-Baligha.